According to economist Brooke Jackson, President Trump has created millions of jobs due to his decision to increase tariffs. The purpose of my speech is to convince you why tariffs need to be imposed to benefit the consumer, the government, and the economy. I'm credible on this because I've done much research on tariffs and their impact. I'm a business major and I'm taking classes on topics such as this. I also have a great interest in the economy and how different things affect it. Since President Trump was elected, he promised to raise tariffs. He fulfilled this promise and tariffs have been raised. This got me thinking, what are the positive and negative impacts that these tariffs have? It is helpful to know about this topic because it is frequently brought up in the news and in politics. Today I will tell you first, how tariffs negatively affect the economy. Second, reasoning behind tariffs, and the benefit of higher tariffs. Low tariffs have a negative effect on our economy. Very low tariffs are known as free trade, meaning there's absolutely no barriers or taxes to be imposed, or very little. Firstly, with no trade barriers, it creates factories in foreign countries, and those factories create adverse working conditions. This mainly happens in countries such as China or Mexico with very low minimum or no minimum wage laws. As factories are built in these countries, the factory owners start operation and aim to cut costs. They do this by paying their workers next to nothing, horrible working conditions, and even forced abuse of child labor. This appeals to the ethical problem of foreign manufacturing. This happens within factories of big companies such as Nike, Adidas, Walmart, and other American retailers. By imposing higher tariffs, this will give these big countries an incentive to produce locally in the US that'll save those people from having to work in the factories in those horrible working conditions. Secondly, free trade causes a loss of jobs. A great example of this is when NAFTA first started. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was a trilateral trade pact between Canada, the US, and Mexico. It basically meant that those three countries could trade within each other without any barriers. Because Mexico has very low minimum wage laws, but lots of big companies that produce in the US move their production to Mexico, putting the factory workers that worked in those factories out of work. This resulted in millions of hard-working Americans losing their jobs. Lastly, free trade has a negative effect on our environment. Free trade is driving the growing global problem of greenhouse gases. Because workers in these developing countries and nations end up producing goods at far lower costs, generally using older and dirtier energy sources such as oil and coal. This contributes to the global warming and greenhouse effect our environment faces. The negative effects of tariffs include job loss, terrible working conditions, and the negative impacts it has on our environment. In contrast, there are many benefits to having tariffs. First, it has benefits to the consumer. It provides a consistent supply chain. For example, during this coronavirus pandemic, I went to get cinnamon at Costco. I couldn't find it and I went and asked a worker and he said that they were out of stock. I then went home and looked up some research and I found out that this is because we stopped importing the cinnamon from the country that was exporting it. This is because the country that was exporting it got hit with the coronavirus and they had to temporarily shut down their factories. So they weren't exporting anything and we couldn't import anything, and that broke the chain of supply. There's not enough supply to meet the demand. This is just one of many examples that surfaced during this corona where there wasn't enough supply to meet the demand. The most notable one being the toilet paper problem. Next, higher tariffs provide the government with funding. If we look back at the early history of tariffs, we can see this. During the 19th century, about 95% of government funding came from tariffs alone. This goes to show the huge benefit that tariffs can have to the government in providing funding. This funding could go things such as sidewalks, parks, new roads, all improving the quality of life in America. Lastly, as stated in the paragraph before, tariffs give big companies an incentive to produce locally in the US. Because the tax would make it so expensive to produce foreignly, they would move their productions back to the US because it would make financial sense. This makes the factories in Mexico or China stop having to produce and save the men, women, and children from the harsh work environments experienced in those countries. Because of the reasons stated above, higher tariffs are a good thing for you, being the consumer, the government, and even the economy. Tariffs have been raised in the past years and has yielded these benefits. This shows by example of their positive impact. So what can be done? If you agree that having free trade is a negative policy, you can go out of your way to support your representatives and urge them to raise tariffs. Whatever party you are affiliated with does not matter. You can still ask your representative to raise tariffs. This is the best way to show the government that you support the raising of tariffs. In conclusion, today we reviewed the negative impacts of free trade and then proceeded to show you why the raise in tariffs are beneficial to the consumer, the economy, and the government. High tariffs are definitely better than lower tariffs because of the benefit it yields to the consumer, economy, and government. Thank you.